Before Cabrini Green was labeled public housing's most notorious failure, it was Little Hell, Chicago's first slum. It birthed Chicago's Irish and Italian mafia and was home to every vice imaginable. The slums were knocked down in 1942 and replaced by the 586-unit Cabrini row houses. For the local black folk, when the war ended, so did their jobs. Mass unemployment followed. Drug dealer became the #1 occupation of Cabrini's adult males, and the decadence and criminality surged. Demand for housing in the area resulted in the construction of several high-rise projects between 1957 and 1962. Cabrini Green. Decades later, it was an urban nightmare, the worst of its kind. Here's how the story played out. By the 1960s, the notoriously corrupt Chicago Housing Authority had stopped screening and background checks on prospective residents. It was first come, first served. Many prominent street gangs would move in and make Cabrini Green home, and it wasn't long before local gangsters took advantage of the vantage points the new towers offered. The Cabrini Green housing projects were known for their high crime rates, and the sniper shootings of the late 20th century only added to their infamy. Imagine living in constant fear, not knowing when or where the next attack might come from. It was a place riddled with paranoia and uncertainty. On April 5th, 1968, one day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, the west side of Chicago erupted in chaos. Though the day started with peaceful marches, by nighttime, neighborhoods were being destroyed and burned to the ground. There were shootouts with police and mass looting too. Over at Cabrini, at around 3 a.m., snipers were positioned in the high-rise buildings and directed their shots at firemen, prompting a police response. Police officers and National Guardsmen stormed the building the shots were coming from and made their way to the 12th floor. They never found the shooters, but they did find a dead body on the balcony. Curtis Jeffro, 31 of that address. He was dead from a headshot. In the aftermath, local businesses packed up and left, and the neighborhood became even poorer. Even worse, the threat of sniper fire gave cops a new fear of Cabrini Green. The residents would now be on their own for the next few decades. In 1970, 38-year-old Sergeant James Severin was a 13-year veteran of the Chicago PD and had previously worked the security detail protecting Martin Luther King Jr. in 1966. 6 weeks before his death, Sergeant Severin stood near Cabrini Green and told a reporter about his hopes for a walk-and-talk patrol, an attempt to pacify relationships between local cops and Cabrini Green residents. Uncle Jim, as he was known to the local kids, played softball with kids, taught them hand tricks, and set up an ice cream fund for them with his own money. 1970 was a tense time in Chicago. In December '69, Chicago police assassinated 2 leaders of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, on the west side. Combined with the assassination of MLK and recurring police brutality, that period saw a general lack of respect for authority across America. Cabrini itself had bred a class of angry black youths who waged urban guerrilla warfare against cops whenever they got the chance. Chicago cops called it Combat Alley because gunshots would go off inside and from the building almost daily. Residents were known to throw Molotovs, bricks, and bottles from the building too. Given the danger and the hate they received, emergency calls from the projects routinely went unanswered by police, but not from Sergeant Severin and Rosado. As the court-accepted version of events played out, on July 17, 1970, multiple witnesses and a security guard testified seeing George Knight and Johnny Veal in the vicinity of and inside the building that shots would later be fired from. Veal allegedly asked a security guard if some of the apartments on the 6th floor were vacant. He also allegedly asked some youths around for .30-30 ammunition. Witnesses later saw Veal and Knights with the .30-30 Winchester and the .30-30 Savage rifles. They heard them audibly planning to ice the police too. Knights and Veal then made their way to a 6th floor apartment with their rifles, where they stood on a bathtub to get a better view of the baseball diamond below. A witness saw the barrel of a gun sticking out of a window, and loud shots followed. Witnesses would give accounts of their braggadocious attitude and statements after the shooting. It was an hour before the end of Sergeant Severin's shift when he went to check out the gunfire from the towers. Sergeant Rosado joined him. There was an ongoing cross-building shootout between the Black Disciples and the Deuces, and both cops walked across the concrete baseball diamond as they approached one of the buildings. They say the blast sounded like a shotgun. Sergeant Severin clutched at his chest where there was a baseball-sized hole. He then dropped lifeless. Sergeant Rosado, 10 feet behind him, turned to help, or maybe tried to run for cover, but he didn't get far. The second shot struck him and spun him around. He took a few more steps and then fell. Both officers had been killed with a single shot before they could get their guns out. When backup arrived to recover the fallen officers' bodies, they had to crouch behind cars while rifle fire bounced off the concrete around them. In the ensuing standoff, cops fired hundreds of rounds into the building. When the police got inside the building, now 200 strong, they kicked down doors and searched each apartment 3 or 4 times. Over 100 people were arrested, and the 2 rifles used in the murders were found in an incinerator in the building. George Knights was caught in the sweep. Johnny Ville turned himself in several days later after seeing his wanted status on TV. The people captured were surprisingly cooperative, but the investigations were later marred with accusations of police brutality at the station. The police allegedly demanded a story from each person under threat of violence or prison. At least one person confessed and implicated 3 others. 2 of the accused were Ville and Knights. Ville and Knights would later be sentenced to indefinite terms of 100 to 199 years at the Illinois State Penitentiary. But the trial was marred by a ton of inconsistencies. During the trial, Ville reported that Chicago police officers threatened members of his family, warning them not to show up for court proceedings. They told Ville that if he was acquitted, they'd kill him. Ville's attorney's office was broken into during the trial and files on the case were stolen. His attorney also told Ville he feared police retaliation. No one testified that they actually saw either Ville or Knight shooting at the police or anyone else. Evidence from the coroner withheld from the jury showed the shots were in fact fired from street level, but the autopsy reports he made were never introduced as evidence. Witness testimonies weren't the most credible, as many were members of rival gangs. There were no fingerprints on the rifles found in the building that day. What was clear was that someone had gunned the 2 officers down from a distance, and Chicago PD had to see someone take the fall for it. Whether they arrested the right people to begin with still remains a mystery to this day. Johnny Ville, who was 17 at the time, was paroled in 2021. George Knights remains in prison. In 1972, manufacturing companies laid off several thousand African Americans. At Cabrini, poverty and desperation went up, and single moms moved in undocumented people to help with the rent. Before long, many people couldn't afford to pay rent, and the city gave up on renovations entirely. People slept in the hallways, stairwells, used drugs openly, pissed in the open, and spray painted the walls with graffiti. The kids played amongst trash and drug needles. Sniper shootings continued unabated, and multiple innocents would be felled every single month. During raids, cops would find weapons stashed in hallway fireboxes, many equipped with telescopic sights. On top of that, Cabrini elevators were by far the most dangerous form of transport in the city. Cabrini youths had learned how to control the elevators to set up muggings, rapes, and extortion. The gang problem got even worse throughout the 70s, when the Egyptian Cobras, Black Disciples, and Vice Lords absorbed all the smaller gangs. Over the years, they grow Cabrini into a 9-figure-a-year drug empire, a gangster's paradise where armed dealers worked in gang-mandated shifts. From the outside, the towers became even more intimidating. After several people were either thrown off or fell off the breezeways, chain-link fences were installed, and they made the towers look like animal cages. Cabrini became shrouded in urban legends of the horrors that happened there. Only junkies would ever dare come close. In 1981, Mayor Jane Byrne moved into a 16th-floor apartment at Cabrini for 3 weeks. She did it to prove to the city that if you had constant police presence in the area, the crime and gangs would go away.
Cabrini residents have mixed emotions about having the mayor as a neighbor.
She can get sniped too. She not no different, she just a different color.
The violence stopped only while she was there. When she left, the gangs learned to weld doors shut to fortify apartments just like the mayor had. By the 90s, 70% of Cabrini Green residents were 16 or younger. One of the project's 134-unit towers had just 5 adult male residents. Law enforcement stayed as far from the projects as possible as they blocked the streets at night near the buildings. The gang members now had the gall to walk outside with automatic weapons and even fire them in the air. 942 Chicagoans were murdered in 1992, making it the most deadly year in the city since 1957. Anthony Kwabene Garrett was an expert marksman who served 3 years in the military in the early 1970s. The 6-foot tattooed 33-year-old umpired Cabrini Youth League baseball games. He was also a security chief for the Stones. Garrett's criminal record spanned 18 years. He was convicted 6 times between 1976 and 1987 on weapons charges. In 1981, he was acquitted of killing a rival gang member in a Cabrini stairwell, and in 92, he was free on bond for a 1991 weapons charge. In the days prior, gunfire had flared between the vice lords who controlled one building and Stones at another. According to court documents on October 13, 1992, witnesses claimed that Garrett had expressed that he was upset with the vice lords and voiced his intention to retaliate. He went to a 10th floor apartment where the Cobra stashed an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. Garrett then went to an open window in the bathroom that offered a direct view of the enemy's building. From there, he saw 6 vice lords. From a standing offhand position, he aimed and fired 2 to 3 shots at them. He then left the apartment and handed the rifle to a youngster on the way out. Jenner Elementary at Cabrini Green had already lost 2 young students to gunfire in 1992. In fact, shots went off so often, the local kids had learned to drop to the ground at the sound of gunfire. A little before 9 a.m. on Tuesday, October 13, 1992, children were out playing, and others were on their way to school when Annette Freeman and her 7-year-old son, Dontrell Davis, grabbed each other's hands and started walking the 100 feet from their apartment building to Jenner Elementary. When the shot rang out, Dontrell dropped to the ground, and his mother assumed he had ducked. He was down from a shot to the left side of the face. He was pronounced dead on arrival at Children's Memorial Hospital. Detectives soon found a witness who had seen shots fired from the window of a 10th floor apartment about 300 yards from where Dontrell was gunned down. The building was more than half vacant, but used frequently by gang members who posted sentries on the upper floors. In apartment 1001, police found 3 .233 caliber shell casings, apparently from a high-powered rifle. A witness would confess to seeing Kwabene carrying a rifle up the stairs of the building earlier that morning, and the police knew exactly who Kwabene was. Garrett was arrested 5 hours after the shooting and held in an interrogation room for 24 hours of intermittent questioning. Garrett signed a 5.5-page confession the next day, or so the cops would claim. Garrett would later claim he was beaten with a rubber hose and forced to sign. In court, prosecutors portrayed Garrett as an incorrigible individual, and in 1994, Garrett was convicted of murdering Dontrell and sentenced to 100 years in prison. The gun used to kill Dontrell was never found. Dontrell's murder made everyone feel embarrassed. It symbolized everything that was wrong with Chicago that year. In the aftermath, it kicked off a renewed war on drugs and gangs, and one city official suggested calling in the National Guard, a step that wasn't taken. Mayor Richard Daley instead ordered a police sweep of Cabrini buildings for weapons and drugs. Underused buildings were sealed. Metal detectors and stringent security systems were installed in the high-rises, and leaders of 12 street gangs declared a truce. That truce lasted for at least 3 to 4 years. Crime dropped citywide the next year, and there were no homicides at Cabrini for 8 months after Dontrell's slaying. Regardless, the murder made local and national politicians shift their efforts from reform of Cabrini to its destruction. Not just Cabrini, but the other projects in Chicago and across America. Between September 27, 1995 and May 3, 2011, Cabrini Green was erased from the planet. What was once Little Hell and Cabrini Green now looks unrecognizable today. The area is filled with high-priced condos and townhomes. And that's the story of the worst ghetto America has ever seen. 23 towers of the most prototypical inner-city black poverty. They say the game is as old as the Bible, and it's a well-known fact that prostitution is the oldest profession of all time. In the U.S., Prostitution is only legal in Nevada and has remained a mysterious black market in the rest of the country. For decades, the game worked on a cash-only basis, and there were no contracts or signed documents. And despite being a 9-figure-a-year industry in some cities, prostitution remains one of the most pervasive street crimes of which there is very little knowledge or persecution. Pimping, on the other hand, is more of a culture bred in the inner-city black neighborhoods and had its heyday in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The word pimp has come to be associated with a snazzily dressed black man, slick with their words, and quick to inflict violence on disobedient employees. The word has no clear origins, but pimps like to come up with their own clever acronyms for it, properly inspiring and managing prostitutes being one of them. Pimps are often very sophisticated, intelligent, and good judges of human nature, attributes that help them thrive in an industry dependent on psychological manipulation. A pimp oversees every aspect of his girl's affairs, from recruitment to employee management, security, logistics, and payment. When researching for this, often, many a pimp will repeat some of the key tenets of the game in their interviews. One girl is too close to zero. It's in you, not on you. And pimps don't die, they multiply. The list goes on. By the end of their careers, pimps have philosophical views on life, work, and relationship dynamics that ring true in a lot of ways. To them, regular people are wage slaves, whores to the system and government. A pimp's mission in life was to live life to the fullest and on their own terms. They had no concept of taxes or savings, and most spent all their money just as fast as they made it, so they could present an image of excess and opulence. But despite the glitz and glamour, the bosses present the game as largely built on manipulation, coercion, and exploitation. Here's a breakdown of how the pimp game works. Even though not formally defined, the path in the game can be seen as 3 phases of a pimp's evolution. Many pimps got in the game because they grew up around it in the first place. Since their childhoods, they were obsessed with the money and control a pimp would possess. On top of that, growing up, many future pimps had an affinity for picking up and dealing with multiple women simultaneously. A man with such ability was colloquially known as a player. In the 70s and 80s, many aspiring pimps grew up on the works of Chicago's Iceberg Slim and tales of San Francisco's Fillmore Slim's pimping prowess. For mentorship, many would shadow as errand boys for older respected pimps and learn the game from them, while others just started off their own natural game. Pimp status would be achieved when one had multiple girls working under him. They had the money, clothes, and cars to show for it. And many pimps will go on to develop their own respective styles of pimping, which we'll get into later. Max status was reserved for the most legendary pimps like Iceberg Slim, Fillmore Slim aka the Pope of Pimpin', and Chicago's Don Magic Wand. Max were known state and nationwide by both regular folk, law enforcement, and in the criminal underworld. A Romeo pimp is a pimp who leverages emotional attachment to turn a girl out onto the street. They are skilled at manipulating their girl's quirks, insecurities, and vulnerabilities. They are adept at charming women from safe and stable backgrounds too. Love is by far the most reliable recruitment method because it makes the girls more controllable. And Romeo pimps would continually feign affection for the girls for this exact reason. They were known to love bomb girls with attention and gifts, but constantly reminded the girls of how much money they were spending on them to create a sense of debt. All of a sudden, they tell the girl that they were broke and owed money to some bad people. They then ask the girls to work on the streets to get the money back. The girls think the ordeal will be over soon, but the made-up debt never gets paid off, and they stay on the streets in fear of danger. Eloping was another tactic employed by Romeo pimps. Once madly in love with their new boyfriends, the girls would run away with their boyfriend and find themselves in a new unfamiliar city where they had to work to get their boyfriends out of their money problems. Pimps threaten to blackmail and humiliate the family if girls try to call or return home, and if the former two failed, they threaten the girls or their families with harm. The girls were left heartbroken, ashamed, and afraid. Many girls were already on the street to fund their drug addictions, and dealer pimping became a popular style during several inner-city drug epidemics like heroin, crack, and PCP. The crack epidemic in particular forced pimps to diversify into selling drugs on the side, and that's when it became more prevalent. A dealer pimp's vested interest meant keeping the girls strung out on drugs as long as they could, or even introducing them to drugs themselves. With this style of pimping, the girls were essentially paid in drugs. Guerrilla pimping entailed using violence, with the threat of it to get compliance. A guerrilla pimp's tactics would range from threats to regular beatings, to outright kidnapping when recruiting girls. Guerrilla pimping was unpopular because it didn't inspire any loyalty from the girls and led to high turnover rates. But many pimps eventually resort to this style when other methods fail. To them, establishing fear through violence is crucial, and they claim some girls even test their pimps and expect to be hit as a sign of their pimp's control. Girls often end up on the streets due to abusive backgrounds, criminal histories, the allure of easy money, or drug addiction. Pimps recruit in locations like bars, nightclubs, drug dens, bus stops, and homeless shelters. Common rules include restrictions on hard drugs because they lead to unpredictability, and prohibitions against dating certain types of men. Ironically, a lot of black pimps would ban their girls from seeing black clients, claiming there was always a problem like non-payment, violence, robbery, or trying to pimp the girls out themselves. Quotas would vary by day of the week, ranging from 3 to 4 figures daily. Pimps would then collect all the money, often leaving their girls with nothing at the start of each day to motivate them. All the girls' basic needs were catered to by the pimp, so they were rarely paid in cash. Competition is encouraged, with the highest earners receiving attention and affection, while those who fall short are ignored. Managing different personalities was the most challenging aspect of pimping. Fights among girls are common, sometimes even leading to shootings. Pimps delegate tasks to a bottom girl, the most experienced employee, to keep others in line. Other roles include bodyguards, nannies, and drivers. For decades, girls worked on the street at night, making them easy targets for predators or serial killers. Old school pimps used to advertise via phone books, newspapers, and business cards. On the streets, they networked with other pimps to keep tabs on law enforcement, recruitment opportunities, and business destinations. They also worked with hotel employees to get tips on cops and discounts, sometimes even paying them off or offering free services. The AIDS epidemic slowed down the pimp economy significantly around '85, and because of the exploitive nature of the game and the fact that some pimps would actively try to recruit minors, and criminal charge that was once pimping and pandering was changed to human trafficking, a name with a much scarier connotation. Today, pimping isn't what it used to be, and has largely moved to the digital realm. There's less need or incentive to work under a pimp, so girls only opt for pimps that can guarantee high earnings without any of the violence. Hell, with the simpidemic, girls can even make a killing without doing any sex acts entirely. The e-pimp game is characterized by things like coded language, on pricing and risque images on dedicated websites. Girls are advertised on online classifieds, social media vehicles, discussion boards, chat rooms, dating websites, and custom web pages. With e-pimping, the money comes to them and they even get higher paying clientele. The internet also negated physical dangers of street prostitution, but e-pimping has also made it easier for law enforcement to track pimp activities via digital footprints, e.g. texts, videos, and images, so pimps and girls often talk in coded language, face-to-face, or over walkie-talkies. Girls are trained to sniff out undercover police via their dress or mannerisms. These days, pimps feel that cops are harder on them. Regardless, the game is propped up by the same people who despise it. Without rich, powerful clientele and the police, the pimp game wouldn't exist. As for their depiction on TV, real pimps think movies exaggerate how pimps treat girls, and they're irritated at how the world is diluted these days, and everyone in rap is a pimp. In hindsight, many pimps have no remorse at the end of their lives. They believe that girls in the business need a pimp for instruction and guidance, and that they elevated the girls that worked under them. Zero remorse for a life lived on their own terms, and upholding a culture predicated on glamorizing human slavery. In the autumn of 1974, as a New York bank opened its doors for another ordinary day, Chad Slim Williams and his crew were preparing to execute one of their daring robberies. Slim, calm and composed, had orchestrated every move, every second of this heist. By the time the day ended, another page would be added to the legend of the most prolific black bank robber in American history, a man whose life defied the rules and challenged the system. Chad Slim Williams was born in Harlem during the mid-20th century, a time of cultural brilliance but economic despair. Before he could remember the music of the Harlem Renaissance or its bustling streets, his family moved to Jamaica, Queens. It was there, in a neighborhood shaped by inequality, that Slim's path to infamy began. From the age of 8, Slim started skipping school, stealing, and running with older kids who saw potential in his sharp instincts. At just 12, he was in his first armed robbery, a drugstore heist that landed him in the Bronx Youth House. The detention center intended for reform instead became his first criminal education. For Slim, the streets weren't just an escape, they were survival. In an America full of economic inequality, upward mobility seemed unattainable for many young black boys. By his teenage years, Slim had embraced the street life fully, moving between New York and Florida, honing the skills that would later make him infamous. At just 15, Slim carried out his first bank robbery. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the thrill, the control, and the planning. Slim saw bank robbery as a discipline, a craft, and he elevated it into an art form. His crew specialized in takeover robberies. This wasn't a quiet demand note slid to a teller. This was a lightning-fast operation. A floor man dominated the lobby, neutralizing threats while others emptied cash drawers or escorted the manager to the vault. Every robbery followed the 60-second rule, in and out before the police could respond. Slim's precision wasn't just bold, it was brilliant. His crew used police scanners, prearranged safe houses, and stolen cars to disappear before authorities even arrived. Over time, Slim's operation crossed state lines, making him a ghost that law enforcement struggled to catch. For years, Slim's crew remained untouchable, but in the end, it wasn't his mistakes that led to his capture, it was betrayal. An informant, desperate to save themselves, gave Slim up. Arrested on charges of conspiracy, he was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. But prison wasn't a dead end for Slim. It was just another opportunity to strategize. While serving time, Slim joined the federal work release program, attending classes at the University of Michigan. But while he studied by day, by night Slim masterminded another wave of robberies. His alibi as a model inmate gave him cover to orchestrate new heists. Authorities eventually caught on. A raid on one of Slim's safe houses ended in a shootout, and this time, prosecutors piled on the charges. Slim received a staggering 95-year sentence, a crushing end to his reign as one of the most resourceful criminals in American history. In prison, Slim began a journey of transformation. Earning 2 bachelor's degrees, he became a vocal advocate for education in correctional facilities. He believed that knowledge could break the cycle of crime for others just like him. After serving 15 years, Slim was granted parole. He spoke of redemption, saying, "Education opened my eyes to what I could be. I'm not the man I was." Upon release, Slim turned his street smarts and connections into legitimate ventures. Using the lessons of his past, Slim founded Black Hand Entertainment, a record label that became a cornerstone of New York's hip-hop scene. His street credibility and strategic mind made him an invaluable mentor to rising stars like Foxy Brown and 50 Cent. But Slim's past occasionally cast shadows on his new life. In Many Men, 50 Cent alluded to a falling out, a reminder that Slim's duality wasn't always easy to reconcile. Despite the controversy, Slim's work in the industry cemented his reputation as a bridge between the streets and success. In 2022, Chad Slim Williams passed away, closing the chapter on a life that defied convention. For the hip-hop community, Slim wasn't just a figure of the past, he was a reminder of the fine line between survival and success. Chad Slim Williams lived a life of contradictions, a mastermind criminal who became a mentor, a figure of infamy who found redemption. His story forces us to ask, can a person truly escape their past?
In the heart of Chicago, amidst the hustle and bustle of city life, a powerful force was emerging in the mid-1970s, the El Ruckins. a name that would soon become synonymous with both fear and reverence. As the city grappled with economic challenges and social unrest, the El Ruckins carved out a niche for themselves. They weren't just another street gang, they were a community force, from organizing neighborhood events to mediating street disputes. They often blurred the lines between protectors and perpetrators. At the helm of this group was Jeff Fort, a charismatic leader with a vision. Known to many as Chief Malik, he was a man of contrasts. On one hand, he was seen as a beacon of hope, a leader who advocated for the rights of the marginalized. On the other, he was a shrewd strategist, always a step ahead of his adversaries. Under Fort's leadership, the group grew in numbers and strength. Their operations expanded, and so did their ambitions. As the El Ruckins solidified their position in Chicago's urban landscape, they also caught the attention of law enforcement. But for the residents of the neighborhood they dominated, they were more than just a gang. They were a symbol of resilience, unity, defiance against a system that is often seen stacked against them. The mid-1970s marked a turning point for Jeff Fort. Incarceration for many is a time of reflection, and for Fort, it was no different. During his time in prison, Fort was introduced to the teachings of Islam. It provided a structure, sense of purpose, a new direction for his life, and a new vision for his gang. Upon his release, Fort emerged with a new purpose. He rebranded the gang, giving it a name that reflected its new ethos, El Ruckins, an Arabic term meaning foundation. It was symbolic of the new path he envisioned for the group, one that was rooted in faith and community service. The El Ruckins, under Fort's guidance, began to incorporate Islamic practices into their daily lives. Prayer sessions became a common sight, and the gang's headquarters echoed with the sound of Quranic verses. However, this shift did not go unnoticed. Law enforcement, already wary of the group's influence, now viewed them with increased suspicion. This new identity, while bringing them closer as a community, also set the stage for the challenges that lay ahead. As the El Ruckins grew in influence and stature, they inevitably drew the attention of the U.S. government. The 1980s saw a heightened focus on organized crime and street gangs, and the El Ruckins, with their unique blend of criminal activity and religious fervor, were squarely in the crosshairs. The government's pursuit was relentless. The El Ruckins were under constant surveillance, and in 1983, their worst fears were realized. Jeff Fort, the charismatic leader who transformed the gang and given it a new purpose, was once again behind bars. Determined to dismantle the group from the inside out, the government introduced a new tool in their arsenal, a wiretap on Fort's prison phone. Every conversation was now laid bare for the authorities. The wiretap provided a window into El Ruckins' operations, their plans, and most importantly, their connection to larger, more sinister plots. Fort navigated the challenges of prison life, unaware of the extent to which his privacy had been invaded. The wiretap will be a game changer, setting the stage for a series of events that would shake the very foundation of the El Ruckins and challenge their place in the annals of Chicago history. As the 1980s progressed, the El Ruckins' ambitions extended beyond the streets of Chicago, reaching across the vast expanse of the Atlantic to the deserts of Libya. The wiretap on Fort's prison phone began to pick up conversations that hinted at a connection far more alarming than anyone had anticipated. Whispers of dealings with Libyan terrorists began to circulate. The El Ruckins, it seemed, had their sights set on a global stage. But what could a street gang from Chicago possibly want with a North African nation? The answer lay in Jeff Fort's aspirations. Inspired by Louis Farrakhan's financial support from the Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi, Fort saw an opportunity. If Farrakhan could secure millions from Gaddafi, why couldn't the El Ruckins? With the financial might of a nation behind them, the possibilities were endless. The U.S. government grew increasingly alarmed. The potential threat posed by a street gang with ties to a foreign nation known for its support of terrorism was too significant to ignore. The FBI, recognizing the gravity of the situation, swung into action, devising a plan to ensnare the El Ruckins. They introduced an undercover agent into the group's inner circle, posing as an arms dealer with connections to terrorist networks. The agent offered the gang a weapon of immense power, an M72 series light anti-tank weapon. The implication was clear. This was not just a transaction. It was an invitation to commit a terrorist act on American soil. The El Ruckins, blinded by ambition and the allure of Gaddafi's promised wealth, took the bait. Meetings were held, plans were discussed, and the trap was set. In every conversation, every handshake, every exchange was meticulously recorded by the FBI. The sting operation provided the U.S. government with the evidence it needed to act against the El Ruckins. But more than that, it revealed the extent of the gang's ambitions and the lengths they were willing to go to achieve them. The line between street crime and international terrorism had been blurred. As their ambitions grew, so did their audacity. Their dealings were no longer confined to the shadows of Chicago's alleyways. They were now operating on an international stage. The next chapter would take place far from the streets of Chicago, in the tropical backdrop of Panama. Word reached the El Ruckins of a meeting, a rendezvous with the Libyan representatives. The promise? A deal that would solidify their partnership and provide them with the resources they so desperately sought. In a Panamanian hotel, a pact was forged. The Libyans, representing the interests of Gaddafi, made their proposition clear. Commit a terrorist act on U.S. soil, and in return, receive a hefty sum of cash and a supply of cocaine. It was a deal that would seal the El Ruckins' fate. Even as they shook hands with their Libyan counterparts, little did they know that their actions were being closely monitored. (1987), the year that would see culmination of the U.S. government's pursuit of the El Ruckins. The stage was set for one of the most sensational trials in American history, with the nation's eyes fixed on Chicago's courtroom. From the outset, it was clear that this was no ordinary trial. The atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation, and as attendees made their way into the courtroom, they were met with metal detectors and state police dogs patrolling the corridors. Amidst his heightened security, it was the El Ruckins themselves who commanded the most attention. Their distinctive attire set them apart, a bold statement of their identity and defiance. Red fezzes adorned their heads, while their bodies were draped in white flowing robes, fur coats, and cornrows. The trial was a media frenzy. Reporters jostled for the best positions, their cameras capturing every moment. The prosecutor's opening statement set the tone. This case concerns organized crime with a twist of terrorism. As the proceedings began, the weight of the evidence against the El Ruckins became clear. The wiretaps, the sting operation, the meetings in Panama. It all painted a picture of a gang that had overreached, blinded by ambition and greed. But as the evidence was presented, they remained defiant. Central to the prosecution's argument was the El Ruckins' connection to Libya. Through a series of recordings, documents, and testimonies, they painted a picture of a gang that had not only sought financial gain, but had also been willing to commit acts of terror on American soil for a foreign power. The wiretap conversations from Fort's prison phone played a pivotal role. The jury listened intently as Fort's voice echoed through the courtroom, discussing plans, deals, and the promise of wealth from Gaddafi. The recordings provided a rare insight into the inner workings of the gang and their international ambitions. Witnesses were called, each adding another layer to the prosecution's case. Undercover agents recounted their interactions with the El Ruckins, detailing the gang's eagerness to procure weapons and their discussions about potential targets.
The testimony from the sting operation was particularly damning, with agents describing how the group had been willing to purchase an anti-weapon for a terrorist act. But perhaps the most compelling evidence was the account of the meetings in Panama. The prosecution presented a timeline, corroborated by hotel records, flight details, and witness testimonies that placed them in direct contact with Libyan representatives. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the evidence seemed insurmountable. The El Ruckers, once feared and revered on the streets of Chicago, were now on the defensive, battling not just for their freedom, but for their very legacy. The courtroom was packed to capacity as the trial neared its conclusion. The jury returned with their verdict: guilty. The courtroom erupted, a mix of relief, shock, and disbelief. The formidable gang that had once held Chicago in its grips had been brought to justice. The aftermath of the trial was swift and decisive. Key members, including Jeff Ford, faced lengthy prison sentences. Their assets were seized, their operation disrupted, and their influence on the streets of Chicago began to wane. In the wake of the verdict, questions began to emerge about the conduct of the prosecution. Allegations of prosecutorial misconduct surfaced, casting a shadow over what had been hailed as a significant victory against organized crime. Rumors of bribes, coercion, and the suppression of evidence began to circulate, tainting the integrity of the trial. As investigations into these allegations deepened, startling revelations came to light. It was discovered that some witnesses, key to the prosecution's case, had been provided with drugs and other favors while in custody. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Several El Ruckin drug cases, previously seen as open and shut, were re-examined. In some instances, convictions were overturned, leading to the release of members who had been incarcerated based on questionable evidence. In the aftermath of the trial, and the subsequent revelation of the El Ruckers began to fade into the annals of history. Their presence, marked by graffiti, gatherings, and the distinct red fezzes, became a rare sight. Other gangs, sensing the power vacuum, moved in, staking their claims and reshaping the dynamics of Chicago's gangland. For the residents of Chicago, the diminishing presence of the El Ruckers was met with mixed emotions. While many breathed a sigh of relief, free from the grip of the gang's influence, others remembered the sense of community and protection they once provided. For all their flaws, they had been a known entity, a predictable force. Their decline brought with it a new era of uncertainty. Today, the El Ruckers exist mostly in memories and stories, a testament to the transient nature of the power and influence. While their legacy is undeniable, their once mighty empire is a reminder that even the most formidable can fade, given time and circumstance. As the years pass and the world continues to evolve, the story of the El Ruckers serves as a cautionary tale. It reminds us of the ever-present challenges of urban life, the complexities of global politics, and the thin line that separates ambition from overreach. In the chapters of American history, the El Ruckers will forever be remembered, not just for their crimes, but for the profound impact they had on the nation's psyche.